Now, picture this. You're scrolling through social media and you see two posts. Post one. After all the hard work for the last 2 years, I finally got that promotion I was looking for today. They get 3 likes. Post number two. My manager is literally traumatizing me by asking me to do my job. 3,000 likes, 500 comments, and someone's already started a damn GoFundMe for them. Welcome to 2025, where suffering is the ultimate social currency, and the most oppressed person in the room gets to set the rules for everyone else. But here's the kicker. We didn't stumble into this backwards world by accident. We built it brick by brick, tweet by tweet, and trigger warning by trigger warning. And now we're all living in a reality where being a victim isn't just accepted, it's an inspiration for us all. So let's get started because we're about to dive headfirst into the most uncomfortable conversation of our time. How did we create a culture where pain became profit, where trauma became trendy, and where the biggest crime you can commit is suggesting that maybe, just maybe, some people might be exaggerating their suffering for social media clout? Let's start with a simple question that's going to make a lot of people very angry. When did being a victim become cool? I'm not talking about actual victims here, people who've experienced real trauma, real abuse, and real injustice. Those people deserve support, healing, and justice. I'm talking about something entirely different. The cultural shift that turned victimhood from something to overcome into something to embrace, celebrate, and let's be honest, monetized. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to the early 2010s. Social media was exploding, everyone's suddenly had a platform, and we're all figuring out this new digital landscape together. Somewhere along the way, we made a fascinating discovery. Post about struggles get more engagement than post about successes. Think about it. When someone posts about their vacation, you might give it a like. When someone posts about their breakup, you're writing paragraphs in the comments. When someone shares their promotion, you double tap and move on. When someone shares their depression, you're sending them DMs checking to see if they're okay. We accidentally gamified suffering. And humans, being the brilliant, adaptable creatures we are, learn to play the game. But this isn't just about social media addiction, though that's definitely part of it. This is about something much deeper, the fundamental human need for attention, validation, and belonging, all of it colliding headfirst with an economy that literally runs on attention. In the attention economy, your currency isn't dollars, it's eyeballs. Views, likes, shares, and comments. And nothing, and I mean nothing, captures attention quite like a good sob story. I woke up this morning and had a really good day. 0 retweets. I woke up this morning and my anxiety was so bad I couldn't leave my house because of systematic oppression. Viral by lunchtime. We've created a system where the most rewarded behavior is expressing pain, and then we're surprised when people start expressing a lot of pain. Now, let's talk about language, because language shapes reality more than we like to admit. Somewhere in the last decade, therapy speak escaped from therapist's office and colonized the entire internet. Suddenly, everyone wasn't just annoyed, they were triggered. People weren't just disagreeing, they were gaslighting each other. Every bad relationship became trauma, every argument became abuse, and every uncomfortable feeling became a mental health crisis requiring immediate validation from strangers on the internet. Don't get me wrong, therapy language serves an important purpose in therapy. These terms exist to help people understand and process genuine psychological experiences. But when you take clinical language and make it everyday vocabulary, something weird happens. The words lose their meaning, and suddenly everything becomes pathological. Your boss asking you to stay late isn't workplace drama. It's Tuesday, for God's sakes. Your friend not texting you back immediately isn't emotional abandonment. They're probably just busy. And your professor gave you a bad grade? That isn't academic violence. You might just need to study harder. But try saying that out loud today and watch how fast you get canceled for invalidating people's lived experiences. As this language spread, something predictable happened: competition. If expressing pain gets you attention, then expressing more pain gets you more attention. You know, the one-up people. And if having one form of oppression makes you sympathetic, then having multiple forms of oppression makes you a social media superstar. Enter the Oppression Olympics, the unspoken competition to see who can claim the most marginalized identity, the most trauma, and the most systematic disadvantages. It's like a really depressing version of Pokemon Gotta Catch 'em All, but instead of cute creatures, you're collecting victim categories. And here's where things get weird. People started rooting around in their past, their genetics, their family history, looking for anything that could qualify them for victim status. Suddenly, everyone's discovering they have ADHD, autism, anxiety disorders, generational trauma, and at least 3 types of systematic oppression they never knew they had. And I'm not saying these conditions don't exist and aren't real. They absolutely are. But the sudden explosion in self-diagnosis coinciding perfectly with the rise of victim culture, that's not a coincidence. But the real turning point came when people figured out you could make actual money from the stuff. Enter the professional victim. People who've built an entire career, personal brand, and income stream around suffering. These aren't people sharing their genuine struggles to help others. They're people who've discovered that victimhood is a business model. They've turned their pain into content, their trauma into a brand, and their oppression into a marketing strategy. Hi, I'm Jericho, and I'm a recovering victim of having to wait in line at Starbucks. Buy my $200 course on healing from microaggression, and don't forget to subscribe to my OnlyFans where I cry while talking about my trauma. Meanwhile, social media platforms were learning something interesting about human psychology. Outrage and sympathy are the 2 most engaging emotions on the internet. So their algorithms started to optimize for exactly that: content that makes you angry or content that makes you feel sorry for someone. Think about TikTok's algorithm. It doesn't show you content that makes you happy or content that educates you. It shows you content that provokes the strongest emotional reaction. And what provokes stronger reactions than injustice, suffering, and oppression? So we end up with platforms that actively promote victimhood content, feeding it to millions of people, creating a feedback loop where the most successful creators are the ones who can present themselves as the most oppressed. And the crazy part, most of them probably don't even realize they're doing it. They've just learned through trial and error that pain posts perform better than positive posts. All right, so we've established how we got here. Now let's talk about how this system actually works, because victimhood culture isn't just chaos, it's chaos with rules. Unspoken rules, but rules nonetheless. Rule number 1, pain equals authority. In victimhood culture, the person who's suffered the most gets to speak the loudest. Your arguments don't matter, your facts don't matter, your logic doesn't matter. What matters is how much you've suffered, because suffering apparently makes you an expert on everything. Well, Susan, I disagree with your economic policy because the data shows, and he shows her charts and graphics and statistics and so forth. Well, Bob, I'm a trauma survivor, so actually my lived experience trumps your statistics. And just like that, the conversation's over. Bob's packing up and going home. You can't argue with lived experience. You can't fact check feelings, and definitely can't question someone's trauma without being labeled a monster. Rule number 2, oppression is math. In the modern victim hierarchy, you don't just get points for one type of oppression, you get points for collecting them all. It's like a really messed up version of bingo. But here's the weird part. This system has created incentives for people to actively seek out reasons to be oppressed. People are mining their family history for trauma. getting diagnosed with increasingly absurd conditions, and discovering new ways they've been marginalized that they never knew existed. Rule number 3, healing is optional. Staying wounded is forever. Traditional approaches to trauma focus on one thing: healing, getting better, moving forward, overcoming your past. But in victimhood culture, healing is almost suspicious. If you heal, if you overcome, if you move past your trauma, congratulations, you just lost your social capital. You're no longer the victim, you're the success story, and success stories don't go viral. So, we've created a culture that actively discourages healing because being healed means giving up on your victim status, and victim status, as we've established, is the most valuable social currency we have. People are staying wounded on purpose because wounded gets you attention, sympathy, and most importantly, power. Rule number 4, criticism equals violence. Perhaps the strangest rule in victimhood culture is this: any criticism, no matter how gentle or constructive, is treated as literal violence. Disagree with someone's opinion? That's not discourse, that's violence. Question someone's claims? That's not skepticism, that's violence. Ask for evidence? Believe it or not, also violence. We've expanded the definition of violence so far that it now includes mean tweets, uncomfortable conversations, being asked to provide sources, someone not using your preferred pronouns, professors teaching facts you don't like, and my personal favorite, the violence is of being ignored. Meanwhile, actual violence, the kind that involves physical harm, is getting lumped in with hurt feelings and awkward social interactions. But here's where this gets really problematic. When everything becomes trauma, nothing is trauma. When every negative experience is labeled as abuse, actual abuse gets minimized. When every uncomfortable feeling is treated as a mental health crisis, real mental health crises get lost in the noise. We've created a trauma inflation. The same way economy inflation makes money worth less, trauma inflation makes actual trauma seem less significant. And the people this hurts most, actual trauma survivor who real experience get dismissed because everyone's claiming trauma for stubbing their toe on the coffee table. Let's talk about something nobody wants to acknowledge: the therapy industrial complex. Therapy, which used to be something you did privately to work through serious issues, has become a public performance and a lifestyle brand. Don't get me wrong, therapy is incredibly valuable for people who need it. But somewhere along the way, we decided that everyone needs therapy all the time for everything. And that being in therapy isn't about getting better, it's about sharing every detail of your mental health journey with strangers on the internet. I can't come to work today. I'm having a mental health day. I can't handle this project. It's triggering my anxiety. I can't be held accountable for my actions. I'm in my healing era. We've medicalized normal human emotions and convinced an entire generation that they're too fragile to handle basic life challenges without professional intervention. Which brings us to safetyism. The belief that people are incredibly fragile and need to be protected from anything that might cause them discomfort, offense, or emotional distress. This isn't about trigger warnings or safe spaces, though those are symptoms. This is about a fundamental shift in how we view human resilience. We've gone from what doesn't kill you makes you stronger to what makes you uncomfortable might kill you. We're raising generations of people who believe they should never have to encounter ideas that challenge them, never have to hear opinions they disagree with, and never have to experience the normal discomfort that comes with growth and learning. And then we act surprised when those people enter the real world and can't handle basic adult responsibilities, workplace conflict, or disagreements without claiming trauma. So what's the actual damage here? What happens when an entire culture adopts victimhood as a primary value system? Turns out quite a lot, and none of it's good. Let's start with the big one: Personal responsibility is dying a slow, painful death in victimhood culture. When everything bad that happens to you is someone else's fault, when every failure is the result of systematic oppression, when every poor choice is actually trauma response, well, you never have to take responsibility for anything. Failed the test? The education system is biased against people like you. Got fired? Your boss was discriminating. Relationship ended? Your ex was emotionally abusive. Can't pay your bills? The economy is rigged against you. Now, sometimes these things are true. Discrimination exists, bias exists, systematic problems exist. But when they become the default explanation for every negative outcome in your life, you've essentially given up all your power to change anything. Because here's the thing about taking responsibility, it's empowering. When something is your fault, that means you can fix it. When everything is someone else's fault, you're powerless. Victimhood culture has turned trauma into a weapon. Not healing from trauma, not processing trauma, not overcoming trauma, weaponizes trauma to shut down conversation, win arguments, and manipulate other people. You can't criticize my behavior because I have trauma. You can't disagree with me because that's re-traumatizing. You can't hold me accountable because I'm triggered. Trauma becomes a get out of jail free card for everything from poor performance at work to treating other people badly. And the most insidious part, once someone plays the trauma card, the conversation is over. You can't push back without looking like a monster. But perhaps the most damaging aspect of victimhood culture is how it's systematically destroying human resilience. We're teaching people that they're fragile, that they can handle adversity, that they need consistent protection and validation just to function. Resilience isn't something you're born with. It's something you build through facing challenges, experiencing setbacks, and learning to bounce back. But when we tell people that every challenge is trauma and every setback is oppression, we're not building resilience, we're destroying it. We're creating learned helplessness on a massive scale. Here's something nobody talks about. Victimhood culture has created a new form of social control that we might as well call emotional terrorism. People have learned that threatening self-harm, claiming trauma, or having public emotional breakdown is incredibly effective at getting what they want and silencing oppression. And because we've been trained to treat any expression of emotional distress as a crisis, these tactics work. If you don't do what I want, I'll hurt myself. If you disagree with me, you're triggering my trauma. If you hold me accountable, I'll have a mental breakdown. These aren't cries for help. They're manipulation tactics. And they work because we've created a culture where emotional distress is treated as the ultimate trump card. Let's talk money, because victimhood culture has spawned an entire economy built around oppression. We've got diversity consultants making six figures teaching companies how to be less racist. We've got trauma coaches charging hundreds of dollars to help people process their generational trauma. We've got social media influencers monetizing their mental health struggles. These are people making more money from their oppression than most people make from their actual jobs. And when your income depends on being oppressed, you've got a pretty strong incentive to stay oppressed. This creates a perverse situation where healing becomes financially irresponsible. Getting better means giving up your business model. But the real chaos happens when different victim groups start competing for the top spot in the oppression hierarchy. Because if victim status equals power, then everyone wants to be the biggest victim. This has led to increasingly absurd fights over who's more oppressed, with different groups trying to prove their suffering is more legitimate, more systematic, and more deserving of attention and resources. You've got people literally arguing about whether racism is worse than sexism, whether being gay is more oppressed than being trans, whether having anxiety disorders makes you more marginalized than having ADHD. It's the world's most depressing debate club, and the prize for winning is more reasons to be miserable. Meanwhile, victim culture has created a chilling effect on honest conversations. People are terrified to voice disagreement, ask questions, or challenge claims because they'll know they'll be immediately labeled as insensitive, bigoted, or traumatizing. So instead of having real conversations about complex issues, we got performative agreements and silent resentment. People say what they think they're supposed to say in public while having completely different conversations in private. This isn't healthy discourse. It's social theater, and it's not solving any problems. It's just driving them underground. Now, here's something fascinating. Victimhood culture isn't a global phenomenon. It's primarily a Western developed world luxury. And when you look at it from an international perspective, the absurdity becomes even more apparent. While Americans are claiming trauma from microaggression and demanding trigger warnings for college courses, there are people in other parts of the world dealing with actual oppression, actual violence, and actual systematic injustices. And you know what's interesting? The people facing real oppression aren't the ones consistently talking about being oppressed. Women in Afghanistan who can't leave their house without a male guardian aren't on TikTok making trauma content. People in North Korea who risk their lives trying to escape aren't starting GoFundMes for their healing journey. Actual victims of genuine oppression are too busy surviving to make victimhood their identity. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Being able to claim victimhood is actually a privilege. It requires safety, security, and leisure time. You have to be comfortable enough to spend your energy collecting oppression points instead of trying to make it through the day. You need a certain level of privilege to make your trauma your brand. You need financial security to build a career around your mental health struggles. You need social safety to make your victimhood your primary identity. Real victims are usually too busy trying to escape their situations to turn their suffering into social media content. But here's where this gets really problematic. Western victimhood culture is being exported globally through social media. It's causing chaos in cultures that have completely different values and approaches to adversity. Traditional cultures that emphasize resilient family honor and overcoming adversity are being invaded by American ideas about trauma, oppression, and the need for consistent validation. And it's not helping, it's making things worse. Imagine trying to explain to your grandmother who survived a war, raised 6 kids in poverty, and never complained once in her life that you need a mental health day because someone misgendered you on Twitter. Generational disconnect is staggering. All right, so we've diagnosed the problem. Now let's dig into the root cause because understanding how we got here is crucial to figuring out how the hell to get out. Let's start with an uncomfortable truth. A lot of this traces back to how we raised an entire generation of kids. The participation trophy generation, the everyone is special generation, and the never let children fail generation. We spent decades telling kids that their feelings were the most important thing in the world and that they should never have to experience discomfort, and that any negative emotion was a crisis requiring immediate adult intervention. And then we're surprised when these kids grow up and can handle criticism, failure, or disagreement without claiming trauma. We taught them that their emotional state was everyone else's responsibility, and now they're adults demanding that the entire world manage their feelings for them. But there's something deeper going on here. Traditional sources of meaning, religion, family community, shared purpose have been declining for decades. And when people don't have genuine meaning in their lives, they'll create artificial meaning wherever they can find it. For many people, victimhood has become their religion. Their oppression is their identity. Their trauma is their testimony. It gives them community, purpose, and a sense of moral superiority, all wrapped up into one tidy package. Social media didn't create victimhood culture, but it definitely put it on steroids. These platforms are designed to amplify the most engaging content, and nothing is more engaging than emotional extremes, outrage, sympathy, fear, and anger. So, the algorithm naturally promotes the most dramatic victim stories, the most outrageous oppression claims, and the most emotional trauma content. This creates a feedback loop where people learn that the more dramatic their victimhood story, the more attention they get. And attention in the social media age equals validation, which equals dopamine, which equals addiction. We've also medicalized normal human experiences to an unprecedented degree. Every emotional, every personal trait has been turned into a disorder, and every life challenge has been reframed as trauma. Can't focus in a boring meeting? You have ADHD. Don't like social situations? You have social anxiety. Had a difficult childhood? You have complex PTSD. Prefer to be alone sometimes? You're on the autism spectrum. We've convinced people that being human, with all the normal struggles, emotions, and challenges that entails, is actually a collection of mental health disorders requiring professional intervention. Traditional authority figures, parents, teachers, religious leaders, community elders, used to play a role in helping people process adversity and build resilience. But we've systematically undermined institutional authority, leaving people to navigate trauma and challenge on their own. And when people don't have trusted authorities to help them process difficult experiences, they turn to the internet. And the internet, as we've established, rewards the most dramatic interpretations of every experience. So instead of a wise elder helping you understand that your breakup is just a normal part of growing up, you get a TikTok therapist telling you that your ex was a narcissistic who gave you complex trauma that you'll need years of therapy to heal from. You might be thinking, so some people are dramatic on social media. Who cares? Well, you should care, because victimhood culture isn't just an internet phenomenon. It's reshaping our entire society in a way that are genuinely harmful. Let's start with the obvious one. We're in the middle of a mental health crisis, especially among young people. Rates of anxiety and depression have skyrocketed over the past decades, particularly among teenagers and young adults. Now, victimhood culture isn't the only cause of this crisis, but it's definitely making it worse. When you teach people that they're fragile, that they can't handle adversity, and that every negative emotion is a crisis, you're not helping their mental health, you're destroying it. We've created a generation of young people who believe they're too mentally fragile to handle normal life challenges, and guess what happens when you believe you're fragile? You become fragile. Meanwhile, employers are dealing with unprecedented challenges of victimhood culture invading the workplace. They've got employees who can't handle feedback without claiming discrimination, who call in sick for mental health days whenever they feel stressed, or threaten to sue if anyone looks at them wrong. HR departments have basically become full-time trauma counseling centers. Managers are afraid to manage because any criticism might be labeled as harassment, and productivity is plummeting because half the workforce is either triggered, traumatized, or in their healing era. Schools and universities are facing similar challenges. Professors can't teach challenging material without trigger warnings. Students demand to be excused from coursework that makes them uncomfortable, and academic standards are being lowered to accommodate everyone's various traumas and triggers. We're literally dumbing down education to protect people's feelings, and then we're wondering why graduates can't handle the real world. Victimhood culture is also wreaking havoc on our justice system. When everyone's a victim and everything is trauma, it becomes impossible to distinguish between real crime and hurt feelings. Courts are dealing with an explosion of cases where someone's claiming they've been traumatized by mean words, uncomfortable conversations, or being held accountable for their actions. Meanwhile, actual victims of real crimes are getting lost in the noise because when everything is abuse, nothing is abuse. But perhaps more seriously, victimhood culture is undermining democracy itself. Democratic societies require citizens who can engage in good faith debates, consider different perspectives, and compromise on difficult issues. But victimhood culture teaches people that disagreement is violence, that other perspectives are traumatizing, and that compromise is oppression. This makes democratic governance virtually impossible. When every policy disagreement becomes a trauma response and every political oppression becomes literally violence, you can't have the kind of civil discourse that democracy requires. All right, so we spent a lot of time diagnosing the problem. Now comes the hard part. What do we actually do about it? How do we course correct from this culture disaster without invalidating genuine victims and dismiss real trauma? Let's start with what individuals can do, because cultural change begins with personal change. First, embrace discomfort. Stop trying to avoid every negative emotion, uncomfortable conversation, or challenging situation. Discomfort isn't trauma, it's growth. The only way to build resilience is to actually face adversity, not run from it. Second, take responsibility for your own life. Stop looking for external explanations for every setback, disappointment, or failure. Sometimes things don't work out because life is hard, not because society is oppressing you. Third, be skeptical of your own victim narrative. Ask yourself, am I actually being oppressed, or am I just facing normal human challenges? Is there really trauma, or am I just disappointed? Do I need therapy, or do I need to develop some coping skills? If we want to fix this long term, we need to completely revolutionize how we raise children. We need to stop treating kids like they're made of glass and start preparing them for the reality of adult life. This means letting them fail sometimes. It means not rushing to solve every problem for them. It means teaching them that their feelings, while valid, are not everyone else's responsibility. It means raising kids who are seeing challenges as opportunities for growth, not sources for trauma. Kids who understand that resilience is built through adversity, not avoided through protection. Schools need to get back to their primary job, education, not therapy. This means ending the culture of trigger warnings, safe spaces, and emotional coddling that's turned universities into daycare centers for adults. Students need to learn that encountering ideas they disagree with isn't violence, it's education. They need to develop critical thinking skills, not just trauma responses. And for the love of all that's holy, we need to stop telling students their feelings are facts and that their lived experiences trump evidence and logic. Social media platforms need to acknowledge their role in amplifying victimhood culture and start taking responsibility for it. This means changing algorithms to promote constructive content over emotional extremes. Traditional media needs to stop treating every hurt feeling as a news story and every personal struggle as a social justice issue. And all of us need to stop rewarding victimhood content with our attention, shares, and engagement. What we pay attention to shapes culture. So we need to be more intentional about what we're promoting. The therapy industry needs some serious reform. They need to get back to helping people heal and move forward, not keeping them wounded and dependent. This means shorter term, goal-oriented therapy focused on building resilience and coping skills, not endless processes of every minor disappointment. Not every personality trait is a disorder. Not every difficult emotion is trauma, and not everyone needs professional help to handle basic life challenges. Employers need to grow a backbone again and start distinguishing between reasonable accommodation and emotional manipulation. They need to set clear boundaries about what constitutes actual discrimination versus normal workplace expectations. This means training managers to give feedback without fear of trauma lawsuits. It means setting performance standards that apply to everyone, regardless of their various diagnoses and triggers. And it means creating cultures where resilience and problem solving are valued over victimhood and complaint. But ultimately, fixing victimhood culture requires a broad cultural resilience, a return to values that prioritize growth over comfort. We need to start celebrating people who overcome adversity, not people who wallow in it. We need to reward healing and not perpetuate woundedness. We need to value strength, not weakness. This means challenging our stories, our heroes, and our aspirations. Instead of making victims into celebrities, we need to make overcomers into role models. Now, let me be clear about something. Advocating against victimhood culture doesn't mean abandoning compassion or dismissing genuine suffering. Real trauma exists, real oppression exists, and real victims deserve support. But compassion without boundaries becomes enabling. Support without expectations becomes dependency, and validation without challenge becomes stagnation. True compassion sometimes means refusing to participate in someone's victim narrative. Sometimes it means challenging them to take responsibility. Sometimes it means saying, you're stronger than you think and you can handle more than you believe. We need to build communities that promote anti-fragileness, if you will. The ability to not just bounce back from adversity, but to actually grow stronger because of it. This means creating social groups, workplaces, and institutions that challenge people, set high expectations, and provide support without coddling. It means valuing courage over safety, growth over comfort, and truth over feelings. It means creating an environment where people are expected to rise to challenges, not shrink from. Now let's be honest about something. Everything I've said is going to make a lot of people very angry because victimhood culture doesn't just disappear when you point out its problems. It fights back, and fights back hard. The predictable responses. Here's what's going to happen when people hear this message. First, they'll try to discredit it by attacking the messenger. Who is this person to talk about trauma? What are their credentials? What's their agenda? Then they'll try to weaponize their own victimhood to shut down the conversation. This is literally violence against trauma survivors. This is invalidating my lived experience. This is harmful to marginalized communities. Finally, they'll try to claim that criticizing victimhood culture is itself a form of oppression. Anti-victim sentiment is just another form of systematic abuse. And you know what? These responses prove the point. When your first instinct to criticism is to claim victim status, you're demonstrating exactly the problem we're talking about. The pushback just won't come from individuals. It'll come from institutions that have built their entire business model around victimhood culture, diversity consultants, trauma therapists, social justice organizers, and academic departments that specialize in oppression studies. These people have careers, salaries, and reputations tied to maintaining victimhood culture. They're not going to give up their rice bowl without a fight. Expect to see studies proving that victimhood culture is actually beneficial, that criticism of it causes harm, and that anyone questioning it is contributing to systematic oppression. And of course, there will be social media campaigns to silence anyone who dares to question victimhood culture. Hashtags trending, petitions will circulate, and cancel campaigns will be launched. Because nothing threatens victimhood culture more than honest conversation about victimhood culture. The entire system depends on never being questioned, never being analyzed, and never being held accountable. How dare you suggest that some people might exaggerate their trauma for attention? That's literally genocide against trauma survivors. But here's why understanding the resistance is important. It's not actually about protecting victims. If it were about protecting victims, these people would be thrilled that we're trying to create a culture that distinguishes between real trauma and manufactured victimhood. The resistance is about protecting the system itself, the power structure, the financial incentives, and the social hierarchy that victimhood culture has created. Real victims don't need victimhood culture to protect them. Real victims need justice, healing, and support, none of which require turning suffering into a social media performance. But here's the good news. Change is already happening. More and more people are waking up to the problems with victimhood culture, and we're starting to see pushback from unexpected places. Parents are starting to raise their children differently, refusing to bubble wrap them against every possible discomfort. Teachers are quietly returning to actual education instead of emotional management. Employers are beginning to set boundaries around what they will and won't accommodate. And young people themselves, the generation that's supposedly most damaged by all this, are starting to reject victimhood culture. They're tired of being told they're fragile. They're tired of being defined by their trauma. They want to be seen as capable, resilient human beings, not perpetual victims in need of protection. We're also seeing an intellectual awakening. Researchers are starting to study the negative effects of safetyism and therapeutic culture. Philosophers are questioning the wisdom of making victimhood a virtue. Psychologists are recognizing that consistent validation might actually be harmful to mental health. Books are being written, studies are being conducted, and conversations are starting to happen carefully, quietly, but persistently. And there's an economy reality that's going to force change whether we want it or not. Companies can't function when half their workforce is consistently triggered. Schools can't educate when students can't handle challenging material. Society can't progress when everyone's too traumatized to take responsibility for anything. The real world has a way of imposing its own logic, regardless of cultural delusions. And the real world requires resilience, not fragile. We're also getting reality checks from other cultures that haven't bought into the victimhood culture. Immigrants from countries with real problems are looking at American victimhood culture with confusion and concern. You're traumatized because someone used your wrong pronoun? I'm traumatized because my village was bombed. We're not the same. These outside perspectives are helping some people realize how absurd victimhood culture looks when viewed from a global context. So, what would a post victimhood culture actually look like? What are we trying to build here? Imagine a culture where people are expected to be resilient, not fragile, where facing challenges is seen as a character building, not traumatizing, where overcoming adversity is celebrated, not processed endlessly in therapy. In this culture, children learn that they're capable of handling difficulty. Students understand that encountering challenging ideas is part of education. Workers know that feedback is about improvement. People still experience real trauma and they still deserve support. But the default assumption is that humans are remarkably resilient creatures capable of healing and growing, not permanent victims in need of consistent protection. In this culture, mental health support focuses on building coping skills and promoting healing, not validating every negative emotion as trauma. Therapy helps people move forward, not stay stuck in their wounds. People understand the difference between sadness and depression, between nervousness and anxiety disorder, between normal life challenges and actual mental health crisis. And when people do need help, they get effective treatment that empowers them to take control of their lives, not therapeutic approaches that keep them dependent and wounded. This culture would also be better for actual social justice. When real oppression isn't competing with manufactured victimhood for attention, it's easier to identify and address genuine problems. When discrimination isn't diluted by claims that everything is discrimination, actual discrimination stands out more clearly. When trauma isn't trivialized by calling everything trauma, real trauma gets the serious response it deserves. Real victims benefit when we stop treating every hurt feeling as victimization. Imagine conversations where people can disagree without claiming trauma, where challenging ideas isn't treated as violence, where different perspectives can be explored without someone having an emotional breakdown. In this world, we could actually solve problems instead of just competing over who's more oppressed by them. We could have nuanced discussions about complex issues instead of shutting down conversation with victim claims. Schools and universities could return to their core mission: education. Students would be expected to engage with difficult material, question their assumptions, and develop critical thinking skills. Professors could teach without fear of triggering someone. Students could learn without needing emotional support for every challenging concept. And we might actually produce graduates who can think clearly and handle complex situations. Workplaces could function like, well, workplaces. Managers could manage, employees could be held accountable, and feedback could be given without lawyers being called. People would be hired and promoted based on competence, not victim status. And productivity would increase because energy would go towards work instead of managing everyone's emotional needs. Personal relationships would be based on mutual respect and genuine connections, not trauma bonding and emotional manipulation. People would take responsibility for their own emotional regulation instead of making it everyone else's job. Conflicts would be resolved through communication and compromise, not through competing victim narratives. And people would grow together instead of staying wounded together. So here we are at the end of our journey through the landscape of victimhood culture. We've seen how we got here, why it's problematic, and what we can do about it. But none of this matters unless people actually start doing something about it. It starts with you. Every single person watching this has a choice to make. Are you going to continue participating in victimhood culture, or are you going to start building something better? This means taking responsibility for your emotional regulation. It means building resilience instead of collecting trauma. It means choosing growth over comfort, strength over... You get the point. It means being honest about your own victim narratives. Are you actually oppressed, or are you just facing normal human challenges? Are you really traumatized, or are you just disappointed that life isn't easier? It also means modeling better behavior for others. Stop rewarding victimhood content with your attention. Stop validating every emotional overreaction. Stop walking on eggshells around people who use their trauma as a weapon. Instead, celebrate resilience. Share stories of people who've overcome adversity. Support those who take responsibility for their lives and work to build something better. Be the person who says, "You're stronger than you think," instead of "You're so brave for surviving that microaggression." We need to create a counterculture that values different things than victimhood culture. This means building communities, institutions, and social groups that prioritize resilience, responsibility, and growth. Start small: your family, your friend group, your workplace. Create environments where people are expected to rise to the challenge, not shrink from them. And yes, sometimes this means speaking up when you see victimhood culture in action, not attacking people, not being cruel, but refusing to participate in the theater. When someone claims trauma from a normal life experience, you can say, "That sounds difficult, but I believe you can handle it." When someone tries to shut down conversation with victim claims, you can say, "Let's talk about the actual issue." When someone tries to make their emotional state everyone else's responsibility, you can say, "I care about you, but I'm not responsible for managing your feelings." But remember, cultural change takes time. Victimhood culture didn't develop overnight, and it won't disappear overnight. This is a long-term project that requires patience, persistence, and courage. There will be pushback, there will be resistance, there will be people who try to shame you in silence. But the alternative, a culture that systematically destroys human resilience and turns suffering into a competitive sport, is unacceptable. Our children deserve better. Our society deserves better. And frankly, actual victims of real trauma deserve better than having their experiences diluted by a culture that treats every inconvenience as oppression. Because here's what's at stake. The fundamental ability of human beings to handle adversity, take responsibility for their lives, and build something meaningful in the face of challenges. If we don't course correct from victimhood culture, we're going to raise generations of people who believe they're too fragile to handle normal life. We're going to create a society where no one can be held accountable for anything because everyone's a victim. We're going to lose resilience, the grit, and the determination that have allowed humans to overcome incredible odds throughout history. So here's the choice before us. We can continue down the path of victimhood culture, where pain is currency, trauma is identity, and everyone's too fragile to handle reality, or we can choose a different path, one that honors real victims while refusing to participate in the theater of manufactured oppression. We can build a culture that expects people to be resilient, that celebrates overcoming adversity, and that distinguishes between genuine trauma and hurt feelings. We can create communities where people take responsibility for their lives, support each other's growth, and face challenges together. But it requires courage. It requires saying uncomfortable things. It requires refusing to play along with the emotional manipulation. And it requires believing that human beings are stronger, more capable, and more resilient than victimhood culture would have us believe. And the question isn't whether we can fix this problem. Humans have overcome much greater challenges than a toxic cultural trend. The question is whether we will. Because at the end of the day, we get the culture we're willing to accept. And right now, we're accepting a culture that treats people like they're made of glass instead of recognizing that they're forged from steel. It's time to remember what we're actually made of. It's time to stop collecting trauma and start building resilience. It's time to stop competing in the oppression Olympics and start competing in the same game that actually matters, building lives worth living. Pain isn't the new clout. Strength is, resilience is, overcoming is. The only question is, which team are you going to play for?